When the Great Depression struck America in 1929, millions of households were suddenly forced to fight for their next meal. Out of this era of desperation came an unexpected savior, the dirty sandwich. While it might sound unappetizing today, during those bleak economic times, it became a literal lifesaver. Simple, low-cost, and made from whatever ingredients families could gather, the dirty sandwich, and its countless variations, became a survival staple for Americans across the country. From countryside homes to crowded city buildings, these improvised meals reflected both the suffering of the times and the amazing resourcefulness of everyday people striving to feed their loved ones. Let's uncover how these basic, often unappealing sandwiches helped save lives and what they reveal about endurance during America's deepest financial collapse. The original dirty sandwich. Nicknamed for its unpleasant look, the dirty sandwich became a critical food item during the Depression. For millions facing hunger, it was more than food, it was a lifeline. At its core, this sandwich was made by spreading lard or vegetable shortening on slices of bread, with a touch of salt and pepper. The pepper's dark flakes against the white lard gave it that dirty appearance. For many families, this was breakfast, lunch, and occasionally dinner. Parents could stretch a few cents to feed their children, as lard was much cheaper than butter, meat, or cheese. Children often brought these sandwiches to school, sometimes keeping them hidden from classmates to avoid shame. In rural regions, families made lard at home, while those in cities bought small amounts of shortening when they had the money. This sandwich didn't need refrigeration, which was ideal for homes without electricity or iceboxes, a common condition in that era. Despite its plain nature, the dirty sandwich offered vital fat and calories, preventing malnourishment, particularly in children. These nutrients were crucial. They helped ensure proper growth at a time when 1 in 5 kids in America lacked adequate food. Today's diet experts might cringe at feeding children bread covered in lard, but in those days, it was often the only option. And for many, it meant the difference between hunger and survival. Lard and sugar sandwich. A slightly tastier twist on the original dirty sandwich was the lard and sugar sandwich, a simple delight for children during the toughest years of the Depression. In this version, instead of pepper, a light dusting of sugar was added, creating a basic sweet treat that delivered both energy and a sense of comfort. Mothers would lightly coat bread with lard and top it with whatever sugar they had, sometimes just a pinch, crafting what became a dessert sandwich for special days. The contrast of the rich fat and sugary topping gave a taste somewhat like a very plain pastry. In many homes, these sandwiches were saved for birthdays or holidays, when no real desserts were possible. Kids eagerly awaited these rare treats, unaware that their special meal was born from necessity, not tradition. The emotional effect of these sandwiches was powerful. They gave parents a chance to create small moments of joy, even in the darkest of times. Many who grew up during that period remembered these sandwiches well into adulthood, not for their taste, but for what they symbolized: their parents' love, creativity, and effort to bring happiness despite the overwhelming hardship. The sweet version of the dirty sandwich, though simple, provided the critical calories that struggling families needed when better food was out of reach, helping them endure until better days returned. When lard supplies ran out and families sank into even more desperate conditions, the ketchup sandwich became the final fallback for many. This basic creation was nothing more than slices of bread slathered with ketchup, a meal born out of sheer survival rather than flavor. Ketchup was relatively cheap and had a long shelf life, which made it a go-to item in many households during the Depression. Just one bottle could stretch across several days of sandwiches, making it a practical choice for large families living on little to no income. While not a complete meal nutritionally, the ketchup sandwich offered a bit of vitamin C from the tomatoes and some calories thanks to the sugar. It wasn't a healthy option, but when there was absolutely nothing else to eat, it helped dull the hunger. Children would sometimes carry these sandwiches to school, where they became silent signs of extreme poverty. Some teachers even noted students eating ketchup on bread day after day, which led to the early development of school lunch support programs in certain areas. In city breadlines and community kitchens, the ketchup sandwich also made an appearance when donations were scarce and supplies were stretched. Volunteers often assembled hundreds of these basic sandwiches when there wasn't enough food to go around. Though simple, this sandwich represented the very lowest tier of Depression-era meals, the final barrier between people and starvation. And despite its nutritional shortcomings, it allowed many to get through another tough day during America's harshest economic period. Mayonnaise sandwich. Slightly above the ketchup version on the food chain was the mayonnaise sandwich, another bare-bones meal that gained popularity among struggling households. Made with just bread and a spread of mayonnaise, it was a modest upgrade offering a bit more sustenance. Mayonnaise provided higher fat and calorie content compared to ketchup, making it more filling when it was on hand. Some families even made their own, using eggs and oil when those ingredients were available. This allowed them to create a small quantity of homemade mayo, which would then be rationed carefully to last for the week. In homes that kept hens, turning eggs into mayonnaise became a way to stretch nutrition further. The oil gave much-needed fats, while the eggs added a bit of protein to diets that were mostly made up of starches and grains. In cities, families without access to fresh ingredients often saved up to buy small jars of commercial mayonnaise. They'd use the bare minimum with each sandwich to make it last longer. Some stores even sold cracked or dented jars at a discount, which made them slightly more accessible for those with very limited means. Like other Depression-era minimalist meals, the mayonnaise sandwich was all about stretching what little you had into something that could keep hunger at bay for just a little while longer. Mayonnaise sandwich. Mayonnaise sandwiches were often given alternate names by parents to help protect their children's pride. They were referred to as cream sandwiches or white sandwiches to avoid emphasizing the tough financial situation the family was facing. These basic sandwiches served as a bridge between fuller meals, giving enough energy for children and adults to manage their school or workday when better food wasn't available. Sugar sandwich. The sugar sandwich reflected both extreme hardship and a parent's heartfelt attempt to offer a small joy during hard times. It was made by placing sugar between slices of bread, sometimes dampened with a bit of water to help the sugar stick. Sugar was a treasured ingredient in many homes, so using it in a sandwich, instead of baking, allowed children to enjoy its sweetness right away. Besides being a rare treat, the sugar also provided a quick source of energy for hungry kids, helping them feel full, if only briefly. Some parents would even set aside their sugar allowance to make these sandwiches for a Sunday dessert or during especially rough weeks. The mix of bland bread and sweet sugar created a small comfort in an otherwise dull diet. Families adjusted the recipe depending on what they had. If cinnamon was around, they'd sprinkle it on and call it cinnamon toast sandwiches. In places where molasses was cheaper than sugar, a thin layer of molasses would take its place. Teachers of that time recalled sugar sandwiches being a common lunch, especially near the end of the month when money ran low. Some schools began keeping sugar handy to sprinkle on plain bread brought by children whose families couldn't afford spreads. These sweet, simple meals show how far parents were willing to go to create little pockets of happiness for their kids, even when resources were incredibly scarce. Onion sandwich. A step up in both flavor and nutrients, the onion sandwich added something extra to the plain meals of the era. This sandwich was made with thin slices of raw onion layered between bread, sometimes with a bit of salt if the family had any. Onions were among the cheapest vegetables during the Depression, often homegrown and able to last a long time in storage, making them a regular part of many meals. One onion could stretch across multiple sandwiches, making it a cost-effective option for families with many mouths to feed. Even with such a simple recipe, the onion sandwich had nutritional value. Onions are a source of vitamin C and minerals that were often missing from Depression-era meals. Their strong taste also made bland or stale bread more palatable. Different regions had their own takes on this sandwich. In the South, sweet onions were used when in season. In ethnic neighborhoods, People would sprinkle in herbs or spices, like paprika in Hungarian homes or oregano in Italian ones. Families with small herb gardens used whatever they had to enhance the flavor. Some added a little bit of leftover lard or pan drippings to add fat and soften the onion's bite. Others would lightly toast the bread if they could afford the fuel. This basic sandwich is another example of how families during the Depression made the best of what they had, turning minimal ingredients into meals that delivered both nourishment and a hint of comfort. You'll find the link in the video description. By becoming a member, you help us uncover these nearly forgotten pieces of American food heritage, stories that highlight the remarkable determination of past generations. Now, let's move forward to discover how these modest sandwiches helped nourish millions during one of America's most challenging times. Bread and butter pickle sandwich. For households lucky enough to have backyard space, the bread and butter pickle sandwich symbolized self-sufficiency throughout the Great Depression. This sandwich was built using homemade bread and pickles, cucumbers sliced thin and preserved in a tangy sweet mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices, tucked between two slices of bread. With gardens becoming lifelines during this era, cucumbers were a popular crop thanks to their ease of growth in diverse climates. Families would collect their cucumber bounty during warmer months and pickle them to ensure a sandwich-ready topping that could last all winter, especially valuable when fresh produce disappeared from tables. The pickle's sweet and sour flavor made them a hit among children, especially those who might reject other preserved vegetables. Their crunch provided a welcome contrast to soft bread, offering both taste and texture that felt more satisfying. Even the term bread and butter echoed the frugal reality of the time. These pickles were often used instead of butter or costly meats, becoming a filling in their own right. They filled both the physical and symbolic gap left by pricier ingredients. In rural areas, neighbors frequently exchanged their cucumber crops and passed down pickling techniques. Communities would gather for canning days, sharing jars, spices, and know how to create essential winter provisions. These group efforts often turned into lively events of cooperation and mutual support. This pickle sandwich stands as a tribute to the importance of home gardening and food storage, showing how families crafted budget-friendly meals that were still flavorful and inventive, even during desperate economic times. Dandelion sandwich. The dandelion sandwich showcased how Depression-era families relied on nature's bounty when grocery money ran dry. This unexpectedly wholesome meal featured tender dandelion greens, picked fresh from backyards, fields, and public spaces, tucked between slices of bread. To mellow the greens' natural bitterness, a bit of lard or vinegar was often added. Children were commonly tasked with gathering the greens, sent out with paper sacks to collect the youngest, pre-bloom leaves, which were softer and milder. This foraging doubled as a form of free entertainment, with kids turning it into a playful competition to see who could harvest the most. Unbeknownst to many, these simple greens packed a serious nutritional punch. Rich in vitamins A and C, as well as iron and calcium, dandelions offered vital nutrients that were missing from the starch and fat-heavy diets typical during the Depression. With fresh produce a rare luxury, wild greens filled an essential gap. City dwellers searched parks and empty lots for edible plants, while country families scouted along roadsides and open fields. Immigrant communities, particularly Italian, Greek, and Eastern European families, passed along generational knowledge about foraging, teaching others how to identify, prepare, and enjoy these wild edibles. Some variations of the sandwich featured mixes of dandelion with other greens like lamb's quarters, wild onions, or chickweed. If available, a bit of bacon fat might be added for extra flavor, or a beaten egg turned into a basic dressing to coat the leaves. The dandelion sandwich stands as a tribute to the ingenuity and resilience of those who realized that nourishment didn't always come with a price tag. Sometimes it was free and growing just outside their door. Bacon grease sandwich. The bacon grease sandwich, a twist on the so-called dirty sandwich, delivered bold flavor using extremely limited ingredients. It was made by spreading leftover bacon drippings, saved from rare family breakfasts, onto slices of bread and seasoning it with salt, pepper, or any other spice on hand. During the Depression, bacon was a costly indulgence, often reserved for special meals like Sunday breakfast. But families wasted nothing. Every drop of rendered fat was collected in jars and stored at room temperature, used sparingly throughout the week. This smoky, savory grease transformed otherwise bland bread into a more appetizing and hearty meal. Children lucky enough to have bacon fat sandwiches often felt a bit more fortunate, as the familiar taste gave the impression of having meat even when there was none. In farming communities where families raised pigs, bacon grease was a bit more accessible. These families sometimes extended kindness to neighbors, offering some of their precious drippings, a quiet but powerful gesture of solidarity during hard times. Regional touches varied. Some families added thin slices of raw onion, a sprinkle of cornmeal for extra texture, or combined the grease with flour to form a paste that stretched the spread and fed more mouths. The bacon grease sandwich represents a time when flavor was salvaged from scraps, and even the humblest ingredients were treated as treasures to be shared and stretched in the name of survival. The bacon grease sandwich showcases the extreme care that Depression-era families took to make the most of every available food resource. Nothing was wasted during those tough times, where people were barely scraping by, one meal at a time. Ketchup and relish sandwich. When families only had a few condiments to rely on, the ketchup and relish sandwich provided a small but significant step up from single-ingredient meals. Combining two popular condiments, ketchup and sweet pickle relish, this sandwich offered a more complex flavor than just plain bread. Though it didn't contain any protein or vegetables, this sandwich was inspired by restaurant dining experiences. People noticed that condiments were often served for free at restaurants, and the combination of ketchup and relish mirrored the flavors of more expensive dishes, like hamburgers. Children particularly liked these sandwiches as they reminded them of the familiar tastes of meals from before the Depression. For some families, weekends meant adding a special touch, like toasting the bread when they could afford to heat the stove, making the sandwich feel even more like a special treat, often dubbed hamburger sandwiches, even though no meat was involved. Urban families typically used store-bought condiments, purchasing the smallest bottles to make them last longer. Rural families, on the other hand, often made their own relish from garden cucumbers, stretching their summer harvests into winter. School lunch programs sometimes provided these sandwiches, recognizing they were slightly more nutritious than plain bread alone. With the natural preservatives in ketchup and relish, these sandwiches could safely be left unrefrigerated in lunch pails for hours, making them both practical and economical. The ketchup and relish sandwich illustrates the creativity that Depression-era families displayed to bring variety to their meals, even with limited ingredients. Mashed bean sandwich. The mashed bean sandwich was one of the more nutritious options available to families struggling through the Depression. This simple creation featured cooked beans, typically navy beans or other affordable varieties, mashed with a little bacon grease or lard, spread generously between slices of bread. Beans were a cost-effective protein source, as a small bag could feed a family for days, and government relief programs often distributed dried beans to households in need. For families with gardens, beans also provided a sustainable food source. This sandwich offered considerable nutritional benefits, especially compared to simpler meals, providing much-needed protein, fiber, and minerals that were often missing from Depression-era diets. Preparation typically involved cooking a pot of beans, often flavored with a ham bone or bacon if available, before mashing a portion and adding whatever seasonings were on hand. The mixture would then be spread on bread, with any leftover beans used as side dishes for other meals. Regional variations reflected local tastes and available ingredients. Southern families might add molasses for sweetness, while Mexican-influenced areas might include chili powder for spice. Some families added finely chopped onions when they could afford them to enhance the flavor. The mashed bean sandwich reflects how families, even in dire poverty, managed to create relatively nutritious meals that provided sustenance and energy during tough times. By combining affordable ingredients, they maximized both nutrition and satisfaction. Creamed salt cod sandwich. The creamed salt cod sandwich was a resourceful way to introduce protein into Depression-era diets, particularly in coastal areas and among immigrant populations familiar with preserved fish. This sandwich featured rehydrated salt cod, mixed with a simple white sauce, and served between slices of bread. Salt cod had long been a staple in many households due to its long shelf life without refrigeration. During the Depression, it was a relatively inexpensive protein source compared to fresh meat. A small amount of salt cod could be rehydrated and extended with a basic white sauce to feed an entire family. The typical preparation involved soaking the salt cod to remove excess salt, then flaking it finely and mixing it with a sauce made from flour, water, and a small amount of milk, if available. Some families added a little onion or pepper for extra flavor. In ethnic neighborhoods, particularly those with Italian, Portuguese, and Scandinavian communities, salt cod was already a traditional ingredient. Families in these areas often had established techniques for preparing it, ensuring that it became a reliable and familiar part of the Depression-era diet. In many communities, the methods for preparing salt cod were passed down through generations. These immigrant communities often shared their knowledge with others on how to prepare this inexpensive and unfamiliar protein source. During difficult times, government nutrition programs sometimes distributed salt cod along with recipes to help families stretch it to feed larger households. Home economists working with relief programs demonstrated preparation techniques at community centers and even in newspaper columns. The creamed salt cod sandwich highlights the importance of traditional preservation methods and immigrant food knowledge during the Depression. These survival tools provided essential protein when fresh food was out of reach for most American families. Cucumber sandwich. The cucumber sandwich gained new significance during the Depression, especially for families with garden space who relied heavily on homegrown produce. This simple dish consisted of thinly sliced cucumber between slices of bread, sometimes with a light spread of mayonnaise, or just a sprinkle of salt and vinegar. Cucumbers were among the easiest vegetables to grow, even for novice gardeners. They could be grown in small urban yards or gardens, and a few plants could yield enough cucumbers to provide sandwich fillings throughout the summer. Unlike many vegetables that required cooking and thus fuel, cucumbers could be eaten raw, making them an affordable option for families trying to minimize expenses. Their high water content also helped with hydration, especially in the summer when refrigeration was not available. While the cucumber sandwich wasn't a complete meal, it provided a refreshing snack that helped tide families over between more substantial meals, particularly in summer when garden produce was abundant. Some families got creative with the ingredients they had on hand. Thinly sliced radishes might be added for a little extra bite, or a few leaves of lettuce to supplement the cucumber. A sprinkle of vinegar would not only add tanginess but also help preserve the cucumber slightly longer. The cucumber sandwich represents how home gardening became a vital survival strategy during the Depression. Families converted lawns and flower beds into food production spaces, supplementing their limited food budgets. Hot water cornbread sandwich. The hot water cornbread sandwich emerged as a filling and affordable meal, particularly in the rural South, where cornmeal was often more accessible and cheaper than wheat flour. This sandwich featured a piece of hot water cornbread, made with just cornmeal, boiling water, and salt. The cornbread was then split and used as the bread for whatever minimal fillings were available. The basic hot water cornbread recipe didn't require eggs, milk, or fat, just cornmeal and boiling water, mixed to form a dough that could be shaped into patties and cooked with minimal fat on a griddle. This technique had its roots in Native American and early settler cooking but became essential during the Depression when basic ingredients were hard to come by. These cornmeal patties could be split while still warm and filled with whatever was available. It might be a spoonful of beans, some garden greens, or even just a thin spread of lard or bacon grease. The result was a more filling sandwich than typical bread because cornmeal provided substantial calories. In sharecropping communities, where corn was commonly grown, families had access to cornmeal even when they had little cash. Mills would grind corn for a portion of the meal, allowing families to turn their crop into a stable food source that would last through the winter. Government commodity distribution programs often included cornmeal, making it accessible to families without land. Home demonstration agents worked through extension services to teach economical cornmeal recipes, helping families maximize this basic ingredient. The hot water cornbread sandwich showcases how regional food traditions were adapted to meet the harsh realities of the Depression. Traditional techniques were simplified and stripped down to their most cost-effective form in order to stretch limited resources. Tomato sandwich. For families with access to garden space, the tomato sandwich became a seasonal luxury during the Depression. This simple dish featured slices of fresh tomato between bread, sometimes with a light sprinkle of salt and pepper, and occasionally a thin spread of mayonnaise if available. Home gardens were vital food sources during this time, and tomatoes were one of the most valued crops. A well-tended tomato plant could produce a bounty of fruit throughout the growing season, providing fresh food when other options were scarce. The seeds could be saved and replanted, making tomatoes a self-sustaining food source year after year. During tomato season, these sandwiches offered a welcome relief from the monotonous, bland meals typical of Depression-era diets. The bright acidity and fresh flavor of ripe tomatoes made even plain bread feel like a treat. Children fortunate enough to enjoy these sandwiches were considered lucky compared to those living on simpler fare like lard or condiment sandwiches. Tomatoes provided essential vitamin C and other nutrients often lacking in limited diets, helping to prevent nutritional deficiencies that affected many Americans during these difficult times. Urban families grew tomatoes in backyard gardens, vacant lots, and even in container gardens on fire escapes. Community gardens also sprung up in cities, allowing apartment dwellers to grow food for their families. Rural families grew large quantities of tomatoes and preserved the excess for winter. The tomato sandwich highlights how home food production became a vital survival strategy during the Depression. The seasonal abundance of tomatoes offered a brief respite of better nutrition and food quality in an otherwise sparse diet. Peanut butter and pickle sandwich. The peanut butter and pickle sandwich may seem unusual by today's standards, but during the Depression, this odd pairing provided an economical way to add flavor and nutrition to daily meals. The sandwich consisted of a small amount of peanut butter paired with sliced dill pickles, all placed between slices of bread. Peanut butter had grown in popularity in the U.S. before the Depression, and its relatively high protein content made it a valuable food source during hard times. However, it was still expensive, so families needed to stretch it. Adding pickles, whether home-canned or bought in bulk, made the sandwich more substantial while using less peanut butter. Surprisingly, the combination worked better than expected. The salty, vinegary crunch of the pickles complemented the creamy richness of the peanut butter, creating a more complex and satisfying taste than either ingredient on its own. Children often enjoyed this unique pairing, and it became a memorable food experience for many who lived through the Depression. Home economists of the time even recommended this sandwich combination in newspaper columns and on radio programs focused on economical cooking. They noted that the protein from the peanut butter, combined with the crunch and flavor of the pickles, made for a satisfying meal at a minimal cost. Some families made variations of the peanut butter and pickle sandwich based on what ingredients they had on hand. For example, sweet pickles could be substituted for dill pickles to create a different flavor profile, or pickle relish might be used instead of whole pickle slices to make the sandwich easier to eat, especially for young children. This unexpected combination reflects the creativity and adaptability of Depression-era cooks who found ways to make satisfying meals by combining limited ingredients in inventive ways. Bread and milk sandwich. When bread became stale and other fillings were unavailable, the bread and milk sandwich offered a way to turn the most basic ingredients into a more substantial meal. This simple dish consisted of a slice of bread soaked in milk, often watered down to make it stretch further, sprinkled with a little sugar if available, and topped with another slice of dry bread. The bread and milk sandwich drew on the long-standing tradition of bread soups and porridges that had sustained poor families for generations. During the Depression, it became a way to salvage stale bread and make it feel more like a proper meal, rather than just plain bread. For families with access to milk, either from their own cows or through relief programs, this sandwich provided essential calcium and some protein, making it more nutritious than other alternatives. The milk helped soften stale bread, making it easier to eat, especially for young children or elderly family members. The sweet version, with a sprinkle of sugar, was often served as a simple dessert or special breakfast. A savory version, sometimes enhanced with a dash of salt, pepper, or a tiny bit of onion if available, was a more lunch-appropriate option. In urban areas where breadlines distributed free or subsidized bread, families would often collect day-old or older bread and transform it into these sandwiches, making the most of what they had. The bread and milk sandwich represents how Depression-era families found ways to make even the most basic and sometimes unappetizing ingredients into meals that provided sustenance and a sense of normalcy during difficult times. Syrup sandwich. The syrup sandwich was a quick source of energy and a sweet treat during times when more substantial foods were unaffordable. This simple dish featured whatever syrup was available, often molasses, sorghum, or corn syrup instead of maple syrup, spread between two slices of bread. These syrups were generally more affordable than sugar and were often produced domestically, making them accessible even in rural areas with limited access to grocery stores. Sorghum was common in the South, while molasses was widely available in many other regions. The sandwich provided concentrated calories from the carbohydrates in both the bread and syrup, giving immediate energy to hungry children and hard-working adults. Though it lacked protein and other essential nutrients, it helped stave off hunger and provided psychological comfort through its sweetness. Some families reserved these sandwiches for special occasions, creating a sense of celebration or indulgence with minimal expense. Others made them a regular lunch option, especially toward the end of the week when supplies were running low before payday. In regions where maple syrup was produced, a very thin spread might be used on special occasions. In apple-growing areas, apple butter sometimes replaced syrup, offering a similar sweet experience with a bit more nutritional value. The syrup sandwich represents how Depression-era families found ways to bring moments of joy and normalcy through food, even when their resources were extremely limited. These simple meals offered both physical sustenance and psychological nourishment during tough times. Butter and sugar sandwich. For families fortunate enough to have access to real butter, the butter and sugar sandwich became a special treat during the Depression. This creation consisted of a thin spread of butter topped with a sprinkle of sugar between slices of bread, a simple approximation of cake or pastry when such luxuries were unattainable. Butter was expensive and often unavailable during the hardest years, making this sandwich a rare indulgence for most families. Those who had cows might have more regular access to homemade butter, but even then, it was often sold rather than consumed to generate much-needed income. Parents would sometimes serve these sandwiches for birthdays or holidays when they couldn't afford a proper cake. The combination of fat and sugar created a satisfying texture and flavor, providing a brief escape from the monotony of everyday Depression-era meals. Some variations included a sprinkle of cinnamon if available, creating what some families called cinnamon toast sandwiches. Others might add a drop of vanilla extract to the butter for special occasions, enhancing the dessert-like quality of the sandwich. School teachers from the era reported that children who brought these sandwiches to school were often the envy of their classmates, highlighting how drastically standards and expectations had shifted during the economic crisis. What would have been considered a poor substitute for a proper dessert before the Depression became a coveted luxury? The butter and sugar sandwich demonstrates how dramatically circumstances had changed for American families, with simple combinations of basic ingredients becoming special treats during a time when traditional luxuries were out of reach for most households. When other condiments became unavailable, the mustard sandwich turned into a go-to meal for countless families facing adversity. This simple creation involved slices of bread coated with yellow mustard, one of the most affordable and longest-lasting condiments during the Depression. Mustard had the perk of being packaged in fairly large containers at very low prices, making it a smart choice for households managing with almost no funds. Its sharp taste also helped cover the flavor of stale or poor-quality bread, which many were forced to rely on during desperate periods. Though not very nutritious, this sandwich gave instant taste satisfaction with its tangy, spicy punch, a refreshing switch from eating plain bread. Some kids even liked it more than other plain sandwiches because of the strong taste. In a few places, mustard sandwiches became linked to extreme poverty, becoming a clear symbol of serious struggle. School teachers and welfare workers often noticed when children brought these and flagged them as possibly needing extra support. When resources allowed, some families enhanced the plain mustard sandwich. A slim slice of onion could be added if on hand, or a sprinkling of salt and pepper to boost its taste. Others might toss in shredded cabbage or any homegrown vegetable to make it more nutritious. The mustard sandwich marks the lowest rung in Depression-era food solutions, a dish created not from culinary skill but out of sheer survival instinct, when no other choices were left and a meal had to be served. Banana sandwich. For the more fortunate families who could occasionally get bananas, the banana sandwich brought a valuable boost in nutrition during the Depression. This meal was made with sliced bananas between bread, occasionally topped with a bit of sugar if available, or a light layer of peanut butter when money allowed. Bananas were considered pricey back then, but their energy content and natural sweetness made them a prized part of scarce diets. When one could be bought, parents often saved for several days, then carefully sliced it to stretch across multiple sandwiches for the whole household. Nutritionally, bananas were far ahead of most other sandwich choices of the era. They were full of potassium, vitamin C, and fast-acting natural sugars, all nutrients missing from the starch-heavy meals common at the time. Some families got creative for birthdays or holidays. A bit of sugar could turn the sandwich into a sweet treat. Those lucky enough to have both peanut butter and bananas made a heartier sandwich with more protein. In many communities, banana sandwiches became associated with Sundays or small special events, creating food traditions that lasted even after the economy improved. Children who seldom tasted fresh fruit often remembered these sandwiches vividly. The banana sandwich shows how even the rare appearance of fresh fruit could uplift a family's Depression-era meals, providing not just nutrition but a bit of happiness at a time when such small luxuries were usually beyond reach. The clearest example of Depression-era food frugality was the toast sandwich, originally a British invention that found surprising popularity in America during the most difficult years of the economic collapse. This odd sandwich was made by placing a toasted bread slice between two plain slices of bread, seasoned with just a pinch of salt and pepper. Its brilliance lay in its ability to mimic a fuller meal experience while using only bread. The textural contrast, the crunchy center surrounded by soft outer slices, offered more appeal and a better mouth feel than eating plain bread. Toasting just one piece used less fuel than cooking a full meal, making it more cost-efficient. Initially recognized in Britain during the Victorian era as food for the sick, the toast sandwich gained new purpose during the Depression when families had to craft meals from almost nothing. Home economists even recommended it in newspaper advice columns focused on stretching food supplies to their limit. Some households added small twists depending on what was available, perhaps a dash of garlic salt, paprika, or other basic spices to shift the taste slightly. Others might spread a thin layer of butter or leftover fat onto the toast if they had any, boosting both taste and calories. Just a bit. Though low in nutrients, the toast sandwich had emotional value. Serving an actual sandwich, rather than plain bread, helped families feel a sense of routine and normalcy even during tough times. For children especially, having something that looked like a typical lunch kept things feeling familiar. The toast sandwich remains one of the most striking symbols of Depression-era inventiveness, a clever way to simulate a full meal using only the bare minimum. Lettuce sandwich. For families with garden space, the lettuce sandwich offered a fresh substitute for condiment-based meals during the growing season. This simple sandwich included crisp lettuce leaves between slices of bread, sometimes with a touch of salt and vinegar or a bit of mayonnaise if on hand. Lettuce was one of the easiest veggies for amateur gardeners to cultivate, even for urban households with limited experience or room. A small patch could yield enough for sandwiches throughout spring and early summer, providing a refreshing break from canned or heavily processed foods. The lettuce sandwich didn't offer much in calories, but added some vitamins and a cool crunch that was often missing from Depression-era meals. Its high water content also helped with hydration during the hot months when many homes lacked cooling appliances. Some versions included other garden vegetables when accessible. A few radish slices or bits of green onion could boost flavor, and a thin slice of tomato added in peak season brought more nutrients. These additions made meals more appealing and nutritious without relying on store-bought goods. Some schools even ran early versions of victory gardens before World War II, where kids learned to grow lettuce and other simple produce that could support their family meals. Often, students brought this home, adding fresh vegetables to their sandwich options and other easy meals. The lettuce sandwich showcases how gardening became crucial to survival during the Depression. Families grew whatever they could to stretch minimal grocery budgets and bring freshness to diets otherwise filled with preserved, repetitive foods. Molasses and butter sandwich. For households lucky enough to have both molasses and butter, this sandwich served as a rare indulgence during the Depression. It combined a light layer of butter with a drizzle of molasses between slices of bread, creating a sweet and satisfying meal that offered fast energy. Molasses cost less than refined sugar and still carried some nutrition, offering trace minerals like iron and calcium. In rural communities, especially across the southern states, sorghum molasses was often made locally, making it easier to get than factory-processed sweeteners. For many families, this sandwich was saved for Sundays, holiday meals, or as a dessert, a small but memorable treat that brought some joy during hard times. These sweet sandwiches broke the monotony of otherwise repetitive Depression-era meals. Their rich, sugary taste made them feel like a dessert, despite being made from just a few pantry staples. In some places, people added a touch of cinnamon or nutmeg when available, or swapped butter for peanut butter, especially in peanut farming areas. This sandwich gained the most popularity in Appalachian regions and the rural South, where sorghum syrup was commonly produced and easy to obtain. For kids who rarely had access to store-bought sweets or desserts, these simple sandwiches were seen as special indulgences. Many who grew up in those years kept a soft spot for this nostalgic combination, enjoying it long after life became more comfortable. The molasses and butter sandwich stands as a reminder of how families during the Depression found ways to make meals feel festive with whatever was at hand, keeping family traditions alive even amid financial strain. The enduring mark of Depression sandwiches, The unassuming sandwiches that carried Americans through the worst financial disaster in U.S. history made a lifelong impression on an entire generation. Those who ate these makeshift meals as children often held on to the experience well into adulthood, shaping their views on waste, thrift, and food. Even after the economy recovered, many Depression survivors never gave up their cautious approach to resources. They saved bread ends, reused cooking fat, and treated food with a level of care that sometimes seemed excessive to younger family members. The phrase, "waste not, want not," was more than a saying, it became a mindset. Many couldn't bear to throw away even small food scraps, a behavior that persisted for decades. Interestingly, some Depression-era sandwiches became lasting comfort foods, remaining popular long after better options became affordable. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, for example, outgrew their humble roots and turned into American staples, though few recall their origin as a budget meal. More importantly, these sandwiches represent the tenacity and imagination of everyday Americans facing immense pressure. Parents managed to stretch pennies to feed their children, often going without themselves. Their cleverness and sacrifice should not be forgotten. Today's systems to address hunger, like school lunches, food stamps, and food banks, were inspired by the hard truths learned during this era. Society came to understand that hunger affects communities, not just individuals, a lesson seared into the public conscience by the Depression. These humble bread creations live on not just as recipes, but as testaments to values of conservation, sharing, and making sure everyone has something to eat, even when there's very little to go around. It's truly amazing how something as simple as bread with a smear of filling could help millions endure such difficult times. These Depression-era meals weren't just sustenance, they were powerful symbols of resilience and survival. The next time you craft a sandwich with artisan bread, fine meats, and gourmet spreads, take a moment to imagine how your ancestors would have viewed such luxury. For them, even a scrap of bread with a bit of lard and salt could mean the difference between hunger and making it through another long day. These unpretentious creations are living history, reminding us both how far we've come and how quickly fortune can reverse. The generation raised on rough sandwiches never forgot those days, and carried their frugal habits with them forever. If you found this look into America's food survival stories insightful, please consider liking and subscribing for more historical food journeys and the traditions that emerged from tough times. Thanks so much for watching.